So why ESLint? What problem does it solve? ESLint is a JavaScript linter. That means that it is a code quality tool that analyzes your code without executing it and can check for common mistakes that often lead to bugs. It'll warn you about these mistakes and thus save you a lot of time and trouble. It is similar to tools like JSHint and JSLint. The primary difference is that JSHint and JSLint come with a predefined set of rules for you. ESLint allows you to heavily customize your rules and even write your own. This makes it extremely powerful and flexible and makes it a great fit for teams where you want to define your own rule sets. Let's take a look at a quick example. Say you have a multiply function, which takes two parameters, a and b. On the next line here, you can see that it returns the multiple of a times c. But clearly there's an error here. There is no c variable. This will throw an error. Normally you would have to manually check this code, either by reading it and checking it, or by clicking through the website until you find the feature that runs this code. Either way, this is usually very error prone. Now how would ESLint help in this situation? We run the ESLint command from the command line, and it runs this code against a set of rules and checks for violations. So here we have a report. In the history.js file, there's an error on line 24. B is defined but never used, and this violates the no unused variables rule. And then on the next line, there's an error that C is not defined, and this violates the no undefined rule. So here you can see that very quickly, ESLint was able to find errors in this code. This is awesome. So without ESLint, either a developer or a QA person has to manually look through the code and execute it, which is very error prone and leads to bugs, which leads to problems in production and very unhappy customers. With ESLint, we can automate this process. Have it analyze your code and automatically warn you against errors and potential errors, which will lead to better code and happier customers. So, ESLint automatically finds errors, enforces rules, and can even fix many of the rule violations automatically. Awesome! In this section, we'll cover installing the command line tool, we'll look at our project structure, and we'll set up a basic rule set for our project. ESLint is a Node module, so you'll need to have Node installed. If you don't know how to do that, you can Google it or look at some Pluralsight courses on how to install Node. We install ESLint with the following command. As is best practice, I'm going to install ESLint locally in my project. The ESLint command line tool is now locally installed in our Node modules folder. But how do we access the ESLint executable from our command line? With Node and npm, any locally installed executables are available in the nodemodules.bin folder. Here we can see that if we call nodemodules/.bin/ESLint, it's actually referencing the executable that's in nodemodules/ESLint/bin/ESLint.js. Before we take a look at the ESLint command line tool, let's take a quick look at our project. We have a basic Node app here with a bunch of server-side files and a bunch of client-side files that live in the public folder. Let's take a closer look at the public folder. Here you can see that we have three client-side apps, one in Angular, one in React, and one in vanilla JavaScript. For this module, we're mainly going to be focusing on the vanilla folder. So let's start by linting our client-side files that are in the vanilla app. We do this by running the ESLint command, which is available to us from the .bin folder, and we have to tell ESLint what folder to run against. As you can see, we get a warning. ESLint is great at providing helpful hints and warnings. ESLint couldn't find a configuration file. We haven't told ESLint yet what rules we want it to run against our project. We can see here on this line that by passing the --init flag, we can set up a configuration file for this project. Let's do that now. We now have a menu here that we can choose from by using the arrow keys. We can either answer questions about our style, we can use a popular style guide, or ESLint can actually inspect our JavaScript files and try and guess which rules to apply. By style here, we mean the conventions that we typically follow in our code. This could include things like whether we use tabs or spaces, how we name variables, what kind of indentation we use, etc. By telling ESLint what conventions we follow, it'll know what rules it should enforce. I'm going to choose the first one. I'm going to answer questions about my style. I'm not using fancy ES6 features. This will be for client-side code that runs in the browser. I'm not using require statements in my vanilla app, so we'll say no. I'm not using React, so there's going to be no JSX. I prefer spaces. I prefer single quotes. I happen to be using Unix. And yes, I definitely require semicolons. I would like my format to be JSON, but it doesn't really matter. It's just personal preference. Great. We've now created a file called .eslint.rc.json where we can find some rules. Let's open this rules file in our code editor so that we can take a look at how the ESLint rules for our project are defined. Vim is the editor I'll be using. In this file, you see a basic JavaScript object. On this line, you see that there is a rules object, which lists the names of the rules. We have the indent rule, the line break rule, etc. Each rule takes an array of arguments. The indent rule takes 2 arguments, the line break style takes 2, etc. Some rules take more than 2 arguments. Up on this line, you can see that this rule set is for the browser environment. It's for client-side code. And on this line, you can see that first we load a default rule set called ESLint recommended. Then we apply our rules on top of that. Now let's take a closer look at the ESLint recommended rule set by heading to the ESLint docs. The documentation for ESLint rules can be found at eslint.org under User Guide and Rules. You'll see here that any rule with a check mark next to it is part of the ESLint recommended rule set. On this page, there are roughly 40 or so. The whole point of ESLint is to help you and your team. I would recommend starting with the ESLint recommended base set, but if you don't like it, you can always opt out. Use what works for your team. Now that we have some rules set up, let's try running ESLint again and see what happens. Wow, ESLint just found 104 problems with our project. Next, we'll look at how we can resolve these problems.